It was a chilly evening in the small town of Ridgewood, the kind of night where the stars struggled to break through the foggy haze. Officer Carl Patterson, known for his strict adherence to the law, was patrolling the quiet streets when his radio crackled to life. Suspicious individual reported near Main and Cedar. Possible theft in progress, the dispatcher announced. Carl's heart raced, not out of fear, but out of the excitement he always felt when duty called. Arriving at the scene, Carl spotted a man leaning against a car, his hoodie drawn tightly over his face. Without hesitation, Carl stepped out of his cruiser, his flashlight slicing through the shadows. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," he barked. The man looked up, startled, his face partially illuminated. "I'm just waiting for someone," he replied, his voice calm but wary. Carl wasn't buying it. The man's unease triggered Carl's instincts, and within minutes, the situation escalated. Backup arrived, and despite the man's protests of innocence, he was cuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car. The officers congratulated each other, certain they had nabbed a would-be criminal. But little did Carl know, this arrest would change everything. Because the man in handcuffs wasn't just anyone, it was Alex Dawson, the younger brother of Ridgewood's highly respected chief of police, Maria Dawson. Alex was well known in the community, not as a troublemaker, but as a kind-hearted soul who volunteered at local shelters and coached the youth soccer team. His arrest sent shockwaves through the police department and the entire town. When word reached Chief Dawson, she was stunned. Maria had dedicated her life to justice and fairness, instilling those values in her team and, most importantly, her family. Alex's arrest didn't just strike her as a mistake, it felt personal. How could her team have made such a colossal error? Determined to uncover the truth, Maria began her investigation. She didn't pull rank or demand special treatment. Instead, she insisted on transparency, wanting to ensure that every citizen, including her own brother, was treated fairly. Meanwhile, Alex sat in a holding cell, confused and humiliated. He couldn't understand how a simple trip to meet a friend had spiraled into this nightmare. The other detainees gave him quizzical looks, sensing he didn't belong there. Alex replayed the encounter in his mind, searching for clues to what went wrong. Was it the hoodie, he wondered. Did I look suspicious just because I was waiting in the wrong place at the wrong time? As Maria dug deeper, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Officer Patterson's record showed a history of overzealous arrests, particularly of individuals who didn't fit his narrow definition of law-abiding citizens. Complaints had been filed, but never acted upon. Maria's heart sank. She realized this wasn't just about Alex, it was about a system that needed fixing. Carl, oblivious to the storm brewing, carried on with his duties, convinced he had done the right thing. But when he learned who Alex was, his confidence wavered. Gossip spread like wildfire through the department. Some officers defended Carl, arguing that he was just doing his job. Others whispered that he had finally gone too far. Tensions reached a boiling point when Maria called an emergency meeting with her team. The room was thick with unease as she addressed the officers, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We are here to serve and protect," she began, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room. "That means treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like. What happened to Alex was unacceptable, and it's a wake-up call for all of us." As Maria spoke, Carl's face turned red. He fidgeted in his seat, his mind racing. For the first time, he questioned his actions. Had he jumped to conclusions? Had his own biases clouded his judgment? The weight of Maria's words was impossible to ignore. But this was only the beginning. The town of Ridgewood, once a close-knit community, was now divided. Some residents rallied behind Alex, demanding accountability from the police. Others supported Carl, believing his actions were justified. Social media buzzed with debates, each post adding fuel to the fire. And then came the twist no one saw coming. A security camera from a nearby store captured the entire incident. The footage showed Alex standing calmly by the car, his phone in hand, texting his friend. There was no theft, no suspicious behavior, just a man minding his own business. The video went viral, leaving the police department scrambling to contain the fallout. As Maria watched the footage, her stomach churned. She knew this wasn't just about clearing Alex's name. It was about restoring trust in the system she had sworn to uphold. But how could she achieve that when her own officers had let her down? And more importantly, how would Carl react to the undeniable proof of his mistake? Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you speechless. In a world where power dynamics and personal biases collide, karma has a way of evening the score. This story is far from over, and the lessons it holds are ones we can all learn from. The release of the security footage sent shockwaves through Ridgewood. It wasn't just about Alex anymore. This was about the entire community grappling with the reality of a system they had always trusted. People started questioning not only Carl's actions, but also the culture of the police department. Was this an isolated incident, or was it a symptom of a deeper problem? Alex's face was plastered across every local news outlet and social media feed. He couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Some people offered him support, stopping him on the street to express their outrage at what had happened. Others looked at him with suspicion, as though his innocence on camera wasn't enough to erase their doubts. Alex hated the attention. He just wanted his life back, the quiet, simple life he'd worked so hard to build. But he couldn't escape the feeling that this was bigger than him now. Maria, too, was caught in the storm. As Ridgewood's chief of police, she was used to handling crises, but this felt personal in every sense. She had spent years building a department that prided itself on integrity and community trust. Now that trust was crumbling, and her own brother was at the center of it. She couldn't sleep at night, replaying every decision she had made, wondering where things had gone wrong. Maria knew she had to act, but every move she made felt like walking a tightrope. If she went too hard on Carl, it could alienate her team and deepen the division within the department. If she didn't act decisively, she risked losing the community's faith. Meanwhile, Carl's world was falling apart. He'd always seen himself as a good cop, someone who followed the rules and kept his town safe. But now, for the first time, he was forced to confront the possibility that he'd been wrong. The security footage was undeniable. Alex wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't a threat. Carl had seen what he wanted to see, and it had led to an innocent man being humiliated in front of the entire town. Carl started avoiding his coworkers. He couldn't handle their whispers, their side glances. Even those who defended him didn't look at him the same way anymore. He felt like a stranger in his own skin, haunted by the realization that his actions had caused so much pain. Carl tried to tell himself that he was just doing his job, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had let his biases guide him, and now he was paying the price. As the tension in Ridgewood grew, more people began coming forward with their own stories. A young woman named Sarah shared how she had been stopped by Carl a few months earlier while walking home late at night. She hadn't done anything wrong, but Carl had interrogated her as though she were a suspect. Another man, Miguel, revealed that he had been pulled over by Carl 3 times in 1 week for minor infractions that didn't seem to warrant such scrutiny. The pattern was becoming clear. Carl's actions weren't just a one-time mistake. Maria decided it was time to confront Carl directly. She called him into her office, her heart heavy with the weight of what she needed to say. Carl walked in, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. He didn't look like the confident officer she had once trusted to lead patrols. He looked like a man who had lost his way. "Carl," Maria began, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk about what happened with Alex." Carl nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I know I messed up, Chief," he said quietly. "I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was doing the right thing." Maria leaned forward, her expression serious. "Do you really believe that? Because I've been looking at your record, Carl, and this isn't the first time something like this has happened." Carl's head snapped up, his face a mixture of surprise and shame. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said. "Sometimes we get a feeling, like something's off." Maria sighed. That's the problem, Carl. Those feelings aren't always right. And when we act on them without evidence, we're not just making mistakes, we're betraying the trust of the people we're supposed to protect. Carl didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. He felt like he was drowning, and every word Maria spoke only pushed him deeper underwater. As Maria wrestled with how to handle Carl, Alex was struggling in his own way. He had always admired his sister and the work she did, but now he wasn't sure how he felt about the police. He wanted to believe that Maria was different, that she stood for something better, but his experience had shaken his faith. Alex started attending community meetings where people shared their frustrations with the police. He listened to their stories, their anger, their pain. He realized that his arrest wasn't just a random mistake, it was part of a larger problem. One evening, Alex found himself standing in front of a packed room at a town hall meeting. He hadn't planned to speak, but as he listened to others share their stories, he felt compelled to say something. "I never thought this would happen to me," Alex began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I always believed that if you did the right thing, you'd be treated fairly. But now I see that it's not that simple. What happened to me isn't just about one officer making a bad decision. It's about a system that needs to change." The crowd erupted into applause, and Alex felt a surge of both pride and responsibility. He hadn't asked to become a symbol of injustice, but now that he was, he knew he couldn't stay silent. Back at the police department, Maria was grappling with how to move forward. She knew that firing Carl wouldn't fix the deeper issues at play. What Ridgewood needed wasn't just accountability. It was a complete overhaul of how the police interacted with the community. Maria started meeting with local leaders, activists, and residents, listening to their concerns and brainstorming solutions. It wasn't easy. The conversations were tense, emotional, and often uncomfortable. But Maria knew that change never came without struggle. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Ridgewood showed no signs of easing. The town was at a crossroads, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Would Maria be able to repair the fractured trust between the police and the community? Would Carl take responsibility for his actions and find a way to make amends? And most importantly, would Ridgewood emerge from this crisis stronger and more united? Or would it be torn apart by the divisions that had been exposed? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain: this story was far from over. The days following Alex's speech at the town hall only added more layers to the growing tension in Ridgewood. The community was alive with whispers, debates, and heated conversations. On one side were those who demanded immediate action and accountability, not just from Carl, but from the entire police department. On the other were those who insisted that the situation was being blown out of proportion, that Carl was simply an officer doing his job in a high-pressure environment. The divide wasn't just between neighbors, it was splitting families, workplaces, and even friendships. Maria felt the pressure from all sides. Every morning she walked into her office to find stacks of emails and letters, some from residents urging her to dismantle the system, others accusing her of betraying the officers she led. Every decision she made seemed to anger someone, and the weight of it all was beginning to take its toll. But Maria wasn't the type to back down, not when so much was at stake. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was determined to see it through. At the same time, Carl was spiraling. He'd always believed that wearing the badge made him part of something larger than himself, a symbol of safety and order. But now he wasn't so sure. Every time he walked down the street, he could feel the stares, the judgment. Even his fellow officers had grown distant. Carl started spending most of his time at home, avoiding the places he used to go, the people he used to see. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd let everyone down: his department, his town, and, most painfully, himself. One night, unable to sleep, Carl found himself scrolling through his phone. He stumbled across a video of Alex's speech at the town hall. At first, he tried to shut it off, but something made him keep watching. Alex spoke with a quiet strength, his words cutting through Carl's defenses. For the first time, Carl saw Alex not as the suspect, but as a person, a person whose life he had turned upside down. Carl didn't know what to do with the guilt that gnawed at him, but he knew he couldn't keep ignoring it. While Carl wrestled with his conscience, Alex was finding himself thrust into a role he hadn't asked for. People started treating him like a hero, a symbol of resistance against a broken system. Local organizations invited him to speak at events, and reporters hounded him for interviews. But Alex didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, he couldn't deny the importance of what was happening around him. If his story could spark change, maybe it was worth stepping out of his comfort zone. But not everyone was cheering for Alex. A small but vocal group began circulating rumors, digging into his past for anything that could discredit him. "He's not so innocent," one comment on social media read. "Didn't he get in trouble as a teenager?" Another post claimed Alex was just looking for attention, trying to capitalize on the situation. The lies stung, but Alex refused to let them derail him. He leaned on his friends and the people who knew the truth, using their support to stay focused on what mattered. Maria, meanwhile, decided it was time to take concrete steps. She announced a series of reforms aimed at addressing the community's concerns, including mandatory bias training for all officers and the creation of a civilian oversight board. The moves were met with mixed reactions. Some applauded her efforts, seeing them as a sign that she was listening. Others dismissed them as too little, too late. And within the department, the changes sparked resentment. A handful of officers openly criticized Maria, accusing her of throwing them under the bus to save her own reputation. One of those officers was Dave Miller, a veteran cop who had mentored Carl early in his career. Dave was known for his gruff demeanor and old-school approach to policing. He didn't agree with the way Maria was handling things and wasn't shy about saying so. "This department used to stand for something," Dave muttered to Carl one afternoon. "Now it's all about politics and public opinion. Don't let them make you the scapegoat, kid." Carl nodded, but Dave's words didn't sit right with him. Deep down, Carl knew he couldn't blame Maria or the reforms for what had happened. The truth was, he had made a mistake, a big one, and no amount of finger-pointing could change that. Still, Carl didn't know how to make things right. Every apology he rehearsed in his head felt hollow, inadequate. The tension between Maria and her officers came to a head during a department meeting. Maria stood at the front of the room, her jaw set, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. "I know some of you aren't happy with the changes we're making," she said, her voice firm. "But let me be clear, these changes aren't optional. They're necessary. If we want to regain the trust of this community, we have to start by holding ourselves to a higher standard." The room was silent, but Maria could feel the resistance in the air. She didn't care. She wasn't here to make friends, she was here to lead. And if that meant losing a few people along the way, so be it. Outside the department, the town's tensions continued to simmer. Protesters gathered outside the police station daily, holding signs with messages like "Justice for Alex" and "Reform the system." On the other side of the street, a smaller group countered with their own signs: "Support our officers," and "Don't let one mistake define us." The standoff became a regular spectacle, drawing news cameras and curious onlookers. Amid all this, Alex received an unexpected visit. It was Carl. He showed up at Alex's door one evening, looking nervous and out of place. Alex hesitated before letting him in, unsure of what to expect. The two men sat in awkward silence for a moment before Carl finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," Carl said, his voice low. "I messed up. I didn't see you. I saw what I wanted to see, and that's on me. I'm sorry for what I did to you." Alex didn't respond right away. He studied Carl's face, searching for sincerity. "Why now?" Alex asked. "Why are you here?" Carl sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I can't stop thinking about it. About you. About everything I've done wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Alex nodded slowly. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive Carl, but he could see that the man was struggling, that he was genuinely trying to take responsibility. "It's not just about me," Alex said finally. "This whole system, it needs to change. And it starts with people like you realizing that." Carl nodded, his expression somber. "I know," he said, "and I want to do better. I don't know how yet, but I want to try." Their conversation ended there, but the encounter left both men with a lot to think about. For Alex, it was a small step toward healing. For Carl, it was a reminder that redemption wasn't going to come easy, and that it wasn't going to come at all unless he earned it. As Ridgewood braced itself for what felt like an inevitable breaking point, the stakes grew higher. The lines between right and wrong, justice and accountability, continued to blur. And in the midst of it all, everyone, Maria, Alex, Carl, and the entire town, was left wondering how far they were willing to go to confront the truth and whether they'd be ready to face what they found on the other side. As the weeks went on, Ridgewood felt like a town on the verge of boiling over. The protests outside the police station grew larger, more emotional, with every passing day. The tension was thick in the air, the kind of tension that made people nervous, jumpy, and unpredictable. Maria watched it all from her office window, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she couldn't say out loud. She knew the town was waiting for her to make a move, to do something definitive, but every option seemed to come with consequences that could shatter what little balance remained. Alex, on the other hand, found himself being pulled deeper into the center of the storm. He had gone from someone who was wrongfully arrested to someone seen as the face of a movement, and that shift wasn't easy for him to process. Everywhere he went, people wanted to talk to him, share their stories, or ask for advice. But Alex wasn't a politician, and he wasn't a leader. He was just a regular guy who wanted to live his life without feeling like a walking symbol. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was happening for a reason. One night, during a particularly heated protest, things took a dangerous turn. A small group of agitators who weren't from Ridgewood had joined the crowd, carrying signs that weren't about justice but about chaos. As the chants grew louder, one of the agitators threw a bottle at the police station windows. It shattered on impact, sending a wave of panic through the crowd. The officers inside the building rushed to the scene, forming a line outside the station. The protesters, already on edge, began shouting louder, their frustration reaching a breaking point. Maria was inside when it happened, and the sound of the bottle breaking made her heart skip a beat. She rushed outside, her voice cutting through the chaos as she tried to calm the crowd. "Please," she shouted, "this isn't the way. If we want change, we have to work together, not tear each other apart." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't seem to reach the people who needed to hear them most. The agitators were pushing the crowd, stirring them up, while the officers stood rigid, their hands hovering near their gear, ready for the worst. Alex was there too, watching from the edge of the crowd. He could feel the tension like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. He wanted to step in, to say something that might diffuse the situation, but he didn't know how. In the middle of it all, Carl stood among the line of officers. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped his baton, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of a threat. He hated how things had spiraled, how one bad decision had turned into this. And yet, standing there, he couldn't help but feel like he was part of the problem. He saw Alex on the edge of the crowd, their eyes locking for a brief moment. It was a reminder of everything Carl had done wrong, everything he needed to make right. Then, as if in slow motion, one of the agitators pulled something out of their bag, a firework. They lit it and threw it toward the police line, where it exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. The crowd screamed, and the officers braced themselves, their voices barking out orders for the protesters to step back. The peaceful demonstrators tried to move away, but the chaos made it impossible to tell who was who. Maria ran toward the scene, yelling for her officers to hold their ground and for the protesters to stay calm. But her voice was drowned out by the noise, the fear, the anger. For a moment, it felt like the whole town was on the verge of something they couldn't take back. And in that moment, Carl made a decision. He stepped forward, his baton lowered, and shouted into the crowd. "Stop," he yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. "This isn't what any of us want. We need to talk, not fight." The crowd hesitated, surprised by his sudden outburst. Even Maria turned to look at him, her face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Carl stepped closer, his hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. "I know I've made mistakes," he continued, his voice steady now. "I know I've hurt people, and I can't change what I've done, but I can try to make it right. Please, don't let this turn into something worse." For a moment, it seemed like his words might have an effect. The crowd began to quiet down, the tension easing just slightly. But then, one of the agitators stepped forward, yelling something about how Carl was just another cop trying to save face. The crowd wavered, caught between the desire for peace and the pull of their anger. Alex, watching it all unfold, felt his chest tighten. He couldn't just stand there anymore. Taking a deep breath, he pushed his way to the front of the crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder with Carl. "He's right," Alex said, his voice loud enough to carry. "This isn't the way. I know you're angry. I'm angry too. But if we let that anger turn into violence, we lose the chance to make real change." The crowd was silent now, all eyes on Alex. He could feel their uncertainty, their hesitation. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew they couldn't let this moment define them. "We're better than this," he said. "We have to be." Maria stepped forward then, standing between Alex and Carl. She looked at the crowd, her expression one of quiet determination. "If we want things to change," she said, "we need to hold ourselves accountable, all of us. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what we're all trying to do. But it won't happen if we let anger and fear control us." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, the tension easing as people realized the night didn't have to end in chaos. But the questions lingered. Had they really made progress, or was this just a temporary truce? And for Carl, Maria, and Alex, the hardest choices were still to come. As the crowd thinned out and the tension in the air began to ease, Alex, Carl, and Maria exchanged a glance. A brief moment of shared relief, but it didn't last long. Just as the last of the protesters started to leave, a police radio crackled with an urgent message. An officer stationed near the department's back entrance reported seeing a suspicious figure slipping away from the scene. The words hit Maria like a punch to the gut. With everything already hanging by a thread, the last thing they needed was another complication. Maria quickly signaled to a few officers to investigate. Carl hesitated, torn between staying by her side and joining the search, but Maria gave him a nod. "Go," she said quietly. "We need to know what's going on." Alex, overhearing, felt a familiar knot of worry tighten in his stomach. He had planned to leave and finally get some rest, but something about the way Maria's face had shifted, a flicker of unease she couldn't hide, made him linger nearby. Carl and two officers moved cautiously toward the back of the station, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. It was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of the departing crowd. As they turned a corner, Carl spotted something on the ground, a crumpled piece of paper. He picked it up and unfolded it, his brow furrowing as he read the hastily scrawled message. "You think this is over. It's just the beginning." Carl's pulse quickened. He handed the note to one of the officers and pressed forward, scanning the alley for any sign of movement. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of someone darting behind a dumpster. "Stop," he shouted, his voice echoing down the narrow alley. The officers gave chase, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. Back at the station's front entrance, Maria was trying to process what was happening when her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, expecting another call from a reporter or a concerned resident, but what she saw stopped her cold. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "You're not as in control as you think. Watch your back." Attached was a photo of Maria standing at the protest earlier that night, her expression tense as she addressed the crowd. Maria's stomach dropped. The photo had been taken from a vantage point that suggested whoever sent it was right there, watching her up close. She looked around, scanning the remaining officers and staff near the station, but everyone appeared focused on their tasks. She didn't want to alarm anyone, at least not yet, but the message made one thing clear. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and it wasn't over. Meanwhile, Carl and the officers had lost sight of the figure they were chasing. They searched every corner of the alley, but came up empty-handed. Frustrated, Carl returned to the spot where he'd found the note, examining the area for any other clues. That's when he noticed faint footprints in the dirt, leading away from the station and toward a nearby abandoned warehouse. It was a place Carl knew well, a building that had been a hotspot for trouble in the past. He radioed Maria, informing her of what they'd found. "Do you want us to check it out?" he asked, his voice steady but tense. Maria hesitated. Sending officers into an unpredictable situation was a risk, but leaving it unchecked could be worse. She glanced at Alex, who was still lingering nearby, clearly overhearing the conversation. "Be careful," she finally said, "and keep me updated." Carl nodded, signaling to the officers to follow him. Alex watched them go, his gut telling him that this wasn't just a random incident. Something bigger was unfolding, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to everything that had happened so far. Against his better judgment, he found himself walking toward Maria. "Do you think it's safe for them to go in there?" he'd asked. Maria sighed, her calm exterior betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we can't ignore it. Whoever left that note wants us rattled, and I can't let them think it's working." As Carl and the officers approached the warehouse, the air grew colder, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made every sound seem louder than it was. The building loomed ahead, its windows broken and its walls covered in graffiti. Carl motioned for the others to spread out and move quietly. They stepped inside, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows across the dusty floor. At first, the warehouse seemed empty, but then Carl noticed something odd. A single chair sat in the center of the room, illuminated by a beam of moonlight streaming through a hole in the roof. On the chair was a small black box, tied with a red ribbon. Carl's instincts screamed at him to back away, but he forced himself to move closer. He carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box, finding a stack of photographs inside. He flipped through the pictures, his jaw tightening with each one. There were surveillance shots, images of Maria, Alex, and even Carl himself, taken at various moments over the past few weeks. Whoever was behind this hadn't just been watching. They'd been planning, documenting every move. The last photo in the stack made Carl's blood run cold. It was a picture of the protest from earlier that night, taken from inside the crowd. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a figure wearing a hood, their face obscured. Carl's radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. It was one of the officers stationed outside the warehouse. "We've got company," the voice said, laced with urgency. "Looks like someone's trying to get inside." Carl's grip tightened on the box as he signaled for the others to regroup. The game had taken a dangerous turn, and whoever was behind it wasn't done yet. Back at the station, Maria's phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "Your officers are walking into a trap. How far are you willing to go to protect them?" Maria's heart pounded as she read the message. She immediately radioed Carl, her voice sharp and commanding. "Get out of there now, it's a setup." Carl heard the urgency in her voice, and without hesitation, he ordered his team to retreat. But just as they reached the warehouse entrance, the sound of tires screeching echoed outside. A black van sped toward them, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The officers barely had time to react before the van skidded to a stop, and its doors flew open. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in suspended silence. Then, chaos erupted. The warehouse erupted into chaos as the van's doors swung open. For a brief, tense moment, Carl and his officers froze, their flashlights trained on the vehicle. Then figures in dark clothing leaped from the van, their faces obscured by masks. They weren't armed with guns, but their movements were sharp, calculated, and threatening. One of them threw a smoke canister onto the ground, filling the air with a thick, choking haze. Carl barked orders to his team, telling them to fall back, but it was clear the attackers weren't looking for a direct confrontation. They moved swiftly, grabbing the black box Carl had dropped in the commotion and retreating to the van as quickly as they had arrived. Carl's instincts kicked in, and he sprinted toward the vehicle, determined to stop them. But just as he reached the van, its tires screeched, kicking up dirt and smoke as it sped off into the night. The officers regrouped outside the warehouse, coughing and disoriented. Carl was visibly shaken, his frustration boiling over. "They knew we'd be here," he said, his voice tight with anger. "This wasn't random. They've been one step ahead the whole time." He glanced back at the now empty warehouse, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. Whoever these people were, they weren't just trying to intimidate. They had a plan, and Carl had the sinking feeling they were running out of time to figure it out. Before they could press her further, one of the officers called out from a hallway, "Chief, you need to see this." Maria and Carl followed him to another room, where they found a safe hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside was a folder marked Insurance. It contained even more damning evidence, this time linking a high-ranking official in the town's government to the corruption. Maria felt the weight of it all crashing down on her. The truth was far more complicated than she'd imagined, and the lines between right and wrong were blurring. But as she looked at the young woman in custody, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. And then, almost as if on cue, her phone buzzed with another text. This time, the message was different. It read, "You're closer than you think. But don't forget, every hero has a shadow." Attached was a photo, taken just moments earlier, of Maria standing in the motel room. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just watching. They were still ahead, playing a game no one fully understood. Maria stood frozen, staring at the photo on her phone. The motel room, the folder in her hand, and her face caught in mid-thought. Someone had taken the picture just minutes ago. The chilling realization that whoever orchestrated this was still steps ahead sent a shiver down her spine. Carl noticed her pale expression and stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "What's wrong?" She handed him the phone without saying a word. As Carl looked at the image, his jaw tightened. "They're still out there," he said quietly, "and they're watching us." Maria turned back to the young woman they had taken into custody. For the first time, the woman's defiance faltered. She saw Maria's reaction and realized the chief was genuinely shaken. "I don't know who sent that," the woman said, her voice softening. "We've been exposing corruption, yes, but we're not the ones stalking you. Someone else is pulling strings." Maria didn't know whether to believe her, but her gut told her there was more to this than she initially understood. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. The immediate priority was ensuring everyone's safety while untangling the layers of deceit. "Take her and the others back to the station," Maria said to the officers. "Secure the evidence from this room and notify me if anything else comes up." As the team moved to carry out her orders, Maria pulled Carl aside. "Something's not adding up," she said in a hushed tone. "The texts, the timing, the photo, they don't match the woman's claims. Either she's lying, or we've underestimated how deep this goes." Carl nodded, his expression grim. "We need to figure out who's behind this before it's too late." By the time Maria and Carl returned to the station, the weight of the night felt almost unbearable. Maria retreated to her office, spreading out all the evidence on her desk, the surveillance photos, the laptop files, the insurance folder from the safe. She scanned through them again, trying to connect the dots. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a watermark on the bottom corner of several documents, faint but unmistakable. It was a logo, a triangle with 3 intersecting lines. She leaned back in her chair, the image jogging a memory. Months ago, during an internal review of department protocols, she had come across that same logo on an old report about private security firms in Ridgewood. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant, but now it felt like a lead. She searched through her files until she found the report. Sure enough, the logo belonged to a defunct private security company called TriCrest Solutions, which had been dissolved years ago after a scandal involving illegal surveillance practices. Maria's mind raced. Could someone connected to TriCrest still be active, using their old tactics to manipulate events in Ridgewood? She called Alex, who had gone home but hadn't stopped following the story. When she explained what she'd found, Alex didn't hesitate. "I'll dig into it," he said. "If there's anything connecting TriCrest to what's happening now, I'll find it." While Alex worked, Maria and Carl focused on questioning the young woman and her group. Under pressure, they admitted to exposing corruption but maintained they weren't responsible for the threats or surveillance targeting Maria. "We've been trying to shine a light on what's wrong," the woman said, "but it looks like someone else is using the chaos we created to push their own agenda." It was Alex who eventually uncovered the missing link. Late that night, he called Maria with a discovery that sent chills down her spine. TriCrest may have dissolved, he said, but one of its founders, a man named Richard Kane, has been quietly running a shell company that specializes in digital forensics and private investigations. Guess where his last few contracts were? Ridgewood. Back at the station, Maria was pacing her office, her mind racing. The cryptic text messages, the photographs, the sudden escalation, it all pointed to something bigger. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd missed something, some crucial piece of the puzzle that tied everything together. Her thoughts were interrupted by Alex, who walked in unannounced, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "You're not going to believe this," he said, holding up his phone. He showed Maria a series of screenshots, social media posts from an anonymous account. The posts included blurry photos of the protest, the warehouse, and even the van speeding away. But what caught Maria's attention was the caption on the latest post. "The truth about Ridgewood will finally come out. The chief can't hide forever." Maria's chest tightened. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just targeting her. They were trying to dismantle the entire department's credibility. And the worst part? The posts were gaining traction, with hundreds of comments demanding answers. She looked at Alex, her mind spinning. "Whoever this is, they're not working alone," she said. "They've got resources, a network. This isn't just about me. It's about tearing down everything we've been trying to fix." Meanwhile, Carl and the officers returned to the station, their clothes still dusted with debris from the warehouse. Carl immediately sought out Maria, who filled him in on the social media posts. The tension in the room was palpable as they pieced together the night's events. It was clear now that the van, the note, and the photos were all connected. But why? And who stood to gain from all this chaos? Then a call came in. An officer on patrol had spotted the black van parked near an old, abandoned motel on the outskirts of town. The officer reported seeing figures moving inside one of the rooms, their silhouettes barely visible through the cracked blinds. Maria didn't hesitate. She ordered a team to move in, this time ensuring they were fully prepared for whatever might come next. The motel was a crumbling relic of Ridgewood's past, its once vibrant neon sign now flickering weakly in the darkness. Carl led the team, his hands steady on his flashlight as they approached the room. They could hear muffled voices inside, a mix of urgency and argument. Carl signaled for silence, his heart pounding as he counted down from 3. Then, with one swift motion, they breached the door. Inside, the room was dimly lit, cluttered with papers, laptops, and surveillance equipment. The people inside, 3 in total, froze as the officers stormed in. 2 of them tried to run, but they were quickly subdued. The third, a young woman with sharp eyes and a defiant expression, stood her ground, her arms raised in surrender. "You've got no idea what you're messing with," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. Carl scanned the room, his eyes landing on a bulletin board covered in photos, maps, and timelines. It was like a twisted spiderweb, with Maria's face at the center. He turned to the woman, his voice low and commanding. "Start talking. Now." The woman smirked, her defiance unwavering. You think we're the bad guys, she said. We're not. We're the ones trying to expose the truth. Ridgewood's golden reputation is built on lies, and your department is no exception. Maria arrived moments later, stepping into the room and locking eyes with the woman. If you have something to say, Maria said, her voice calm but firm, say it. The woman hesitated, then gestured toward a laptop on the table. The files are all there, she said. Every bribe, every cover-up, every dirty deal your department has ever made. We've been collecting evidence for months. Your brother's arrest? That wasn't an accident. It was the catalyst. We wanted to see how far you'd go to protect him. Maria's stomach sank. She moved toward the laptop, her hands shaking as she opened the files. What she saw made her blood run cold. There were documents, emails, and recordings, evidence of corruption that stretched back years. And while much of it predated her tenure as chief, some of it implicated people she trusted, people she thought were working to rebuild the department. Carl stepped forward, his jaw tight. So you're just vigilantes, he said, his voice laced with anger. You think this justifies everything you've done? The woman met his gaze, her expression softening slightly. We're not the villains here, she said, but maybe you're starting to realize who the real ones are. Maria's heart sank. She remembered Kane's name from the old scandal. He had been a shadowy figure known for exploiting gray areas in the law. If Kane was involved, it meant the situation was far more calculated than anyone had realized. She called for an emergency meeting with her team, determined to act before Kane could strike again. The next day, they tracked Kane to an upscale office building on the outskirts of town. Maria led a small team, including Carl, to confront him. As they entered his office, Kane greeted them with an unsettling calm. He was a man in his late 50s, with sharp features and a demeanor that exuded confidence. Chief Ramirez, he said with a sly smile, I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Maria didn't waste time with pleasantries. You've been orchestrating this chaos, she said, her voice firm. The surveillance, the messages, the manipulation, it all leads back to you. Why? Kane leaned back in his chair, his smile never wavering. It's nothing personal, he said. Ridgewood has been a lucrative project for me. The corruption you've been trying so hard to root out, it's profitable, for the right people. When your little crusade started gaining traction, I had to take steps to protect my interests. Carl stepped forward, his fists clenched. So you endangered lives, destroyed trust, and tried to break the department, all for money. Kane shrugged. It's business, nothing more. Maria's anger simmered beneath the surface, but she kept her composure. It ends now, she said. We have enough evidence to expose you and dismantle whatever operation you've been running here. Kane's expression darkened for the first time. You think you've won, he said, his voice low. Go ahead, expose me. But the damage is already done. The people of Ridgewood don't trust you or your department anymore. You've lost, Chief, whether you realize it or not. Maria didn't respond. Instead, she signaled to the officers, who placed Kane under arrest. As they escorted him out, Maria felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. Kane's words echoed in her mind. He wasn't entirely wrong. Ridgewood's trust in the police department had been deeply shaken. The road to rebuilding it would be long and difficult. In the days that followed, the department worked tirelessly to untangle the mess Kane had left behind. The young activists who had exposed the initial corruption were offered a chance to collaborate with the department, helping to ensure transparency moving forward. Maria knew it wouldn't erase the past, but it was a step toward rebuilding trust. As for Alex, he continued to document the story, sharing it with the community in a way that highlighted the lessons learned. His reporting helped shine a light on the importance of accountability and the dangers of unchecked power.